Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hope you all had a good Thanksgiving. We did. Almost because we can try. Everyone came to us. Okay, we don't have much left. I don't know how. Just out of curiosity, how many of you saw the email I sent out? I think it was last night. Okay. So you've gotten me out of your spam filter or whatever it's like. Like I said, we're going to have one lecture today. And that'll probably be maybe a half hour, 45 minutes. And that'll be it for the day. You can do team meetings or run off and do other things. Next week we'll do Webster readings 7 and 8. And that'll probably be about an hour lecture. And then the week after that is your project videos. And that's it for the class. If anyone, I've updated the grading on all the team deliverables. And as per the email, if there's makeup work, either things that didn't get recorded that should have, or stuff you just missed and you want to try and get some partial credit, drop me an email. But other than that, the grades, the assignments should all be up to date. If there's a problem, let me know. Yes?
I noticed on some of the billable hours, like back in October or something, yeah, it's just there's no grade in there yet.
Okay, well,
I guess it's happening to a lot of people, but...
do me a favor and send me an email.
Okay.
With my memory, I may forget between now and the time I get home.
Sounds good.
And I'll go back and check those. Those all should work the same, but they might not, depending on what I did when I was setting it up. Any other comments or questions on things there? So, as we said, and a number of you weren't here last week, you all did very well on the midterm. I'm going to have to make it tougher next semester. I really am. I don't know if the department will say anything. This is a senior level class, so on and so forth, but the average score was probably about 105%. So I have to crank it, make it a little tougher, a little less extra credit. But as I said, for those who weren't here last week, generally speaking, as I felt last semester, I looked at your answers and said, my work here is done. You guys know the stuff. You know what the risks are. You know what the citations are for the risks, at least where to go look to find them. And by so doing, you are better prepared for IT in the real world than the vast majority of people who are out there working already. And if you think this stuff is kind of, oh, this rarely happens, no, trust me. As I've said before, I have conversations with my daughter Crystal all the time, and she works at a great place, but she still sort of shakes her head. She says, why are they doing this? And I said, okay, this is why they're doing this, and this is why it's a stupid idea. So that said, so that's the class. You guys have been great. I'll probably sometime, not today, possibly on the last day of class. And like I said, no final unless if you really want to pull your grade up from what you've gotten. That's why I think I was going through the assignments. Drop me an email, and I'll come up with a final exam to get a bit of extra credit. And as was raised, I think the very first day of class, the final won't hurt you. In other words, if you get a 0 on the final, it's not going to lower your grade. Most it can do is raise your grades up. Today we're going to talk, and like I said, this is probably about a half-hour lecture, possibly a little longer. As you know, I have a real hobby horse about software quality assurance. And from your readings, I would hope you've picked up also that this is a major iceberg on which a lot of ships founder. Again, going all the way back to Brooks, his original, mythical man month of 75, said, most projects end up spending about half their time. He simply calls it testing. I broaden that to SQA, whether they planned for it or not. And I've reviewed somewhere on the order of 150 failed IT projects, and I can tell you, this is a major issue. That failure to take the necessary pains for proper quality up front costs billions of dollars a year in failed and troubled projects. And we've talked about some of the reasons, the biggest being the lack of transparency. The fact that, you can look at the building, the big, is this engineering that they're building right here? And am I pointing in the right direction?
Yeah.
I think I am, yes. Anyway. You can walk by that and you can say, hey, it looks different than it looked yesterday. And I can see they did this and this, and they've got this part in here, and they've put this in, and so on. It is so difficult to do that with software. And it's why SQA is so important. But it's precisely because it's so difficult to do that software that most companies sort of say, hey, the prototype looks great. We just have to make these few things work, and we'll put it all together, and bam, we'll be done. They often are finished, but not in the way they think. Anyway. Oops. Come on. Okay. So, the core problem, and this covers a little of what we talked about earlier in the semester, but I'm going to go into more detail. SQA, the real core problem is SQA is seen as a second-rate division within IT. Pure and simple. Personally, I think every software engineer should spend time in SQA. I have. I've worked. Not only because I've had to do SQA as part of the development team, but I actually worked at Sun Microsystems in their developer tools. That's where I'm looking for. Bug reporting department. We'd get in bug reports on like their C compilers, their debuggers, and so on and so forth. And I'd have to dig in and try and figure out what was wrong. That was actually a great experience. Anyway, SQA is often falsely equated with just testing. And testing is often a very small set. I don't have a lecture in here on the wide scope of potential testings that you can do, but I probably should. SQA, or testing, is often seen as, well, it's something you do the last few weeks or the last month. And if there's a crunch with money or time, it's like, oh, okay, we just won't test it as much. We'll push it out there. We'll let the users test it for us. And I think, I dare say, most of us have been on the receiving end of that, where some new app or game or application ships, and it's like, this thing is a piece of crap. And it's sad to see how many companies damage their reputation by doing that. Okay, the results, again. And this is something both Brooks and, actually I think all three of the authors address this point. Things take longer and cost more because of the unwillingness to spend more time and money up front on SQA. And the system, if you do push it into production, it's more expensive to support that system because you have put a rather than making a conscious decision as to which defects to defer and so on and so forth and what the cost is, you sort of push it out there and then you spend all your time fixing it. I should have grabbed it. I posted a picture a week or so ago that shows a pilot in a fabric skin airplane, so it's from about 60 years ago, in midair, out on the wing, trying to turn the propeller to get it to start again. There are scarily some software projects that are like that. They are literally in mid-flight and in production, and it's like we've just encountered a critical error, and they're trying desperately to fix it before everything crashes. Okay, now we've talked about software life cycles. You really have two broad categories. One is waterfall, one is agile, iterative, whatever. There are heated wars over this as to the flaws and strengths of both. Just recognize both work. Most software in the world has been developed with one or the other of these methodologies, and it's in production. The problem is that in the arguments over methodologies, SQA gets either shoved in a particular slot within the methodology, within the life cycle, or just sort of gets overlooked.
Can we go back?
Oh.
So my wife works in quality engineering, and forward, right there. In either case, testing is usually seen as just a phase in the life cycle. If you're doing adaptive and you're trying to regularly have updates coming, isn't that the only way to do it? How else would it do it, or am I understanding the slide wrong? Because, I mean, if you're trying to push out products every week, then you want your quality assurance team to be working on those tests throughout the week to ensure that by Friday, then it's ready to go. And if it's not, then you hold back a week, which is usually safe to do in adaptive pushes and softwares, right?
Yes, and you're right. But it's a slot there, and I've actually been in situations where the company was doing trying to do a weekly build, and was not allowing sufficient time. They were actually doing a weekly build, they were not allowing sufficient time for test. Or in an effort to try and get sufficient testing done, they were really getting very little new code written each week.
Okay.
And it gets back to the fact that the methodologies themselves are very much tied to the size and scope of the project, the nature of the organization, and quite bluntly, the quality of the people who are doing the work. If you have great developers, then the developers themselves are going to be more careful in their coding, they're less likely to introduce defects, and they're more quick to find them on their own. But you'll run into organizations that are saying, oh yes, we're doing adaptive, and you have coders who sort of throw stuff over the transom, saying, oh, the SQA folks will catch the defects. And what you get there is you get a thrash, where the SQA folks say, you didn't even look at half the cases that your code is supposed to implement. Send this to us when you're done. And the coder does a few things and throws it back over the transom. And this is why I don't get caught up in methodology wars, why I don't get caught up in language wars, and so on and so forth. I've seen great software written using a wide variety of methodologies, a wide variety of tools, a wide variety of languages, and it almost always comes down to the people involved. Because smart, solid software engineers will do the right thing. They'll raise their hand and say, wait, this isn't working, meaning this whole process isn't working. Therefore, let's slow things down, let's take a break, let's put things on hold, and so on. So yeah, there are places that do various methodologies and life cycles extremely well, and there are places that do them very poorly and then wonder why they don't get the results. Okay, so this is all based. I was consulting at Fannie Mae back 20 years ago. They had a big object technology initiative. And back then object technology was the big buzzword. This is, you code 10 times faster, you don't need to do SQA. It's kind of like, oh no, this is so bad. I had just written my book, Pitfalls of Object-Oriented Development, so it's kind of like, no, wait. Object technology, an object-oriented approach is nice, but it is not a silver bullet. And here's a whole book saying why it's not a silver bullet. And we actually had a situation in Fannie where in Fannie Mae, as it was back then 20 years ago, you tended to have a lot of little fiefdoms, little kingdoms that had been built up by different senior vice presidents. And one of them was adopting object technology and basically had said, well, we're doing object technology. We don't need to do all this focus on testing. It we simply design things properly and implement them, the code will just work. No, seriously. And that was not an uncommon attitude in the early to mid 90s. Let me say that. And so one of the directors below the senior vice president came to me and said, you know, here's what so-and-so was saying. And after I got my face out of my hands, he said, can you write up a white paper to explain why they need to do SQA, even though they're doing object-oriented development? And I did, and I've actually continued, for 20 years, continued to refer back to the white paper. And one of the things I did was try and say, first, SQA is not just testing, and second, SQA needs to be involved in every phase of the development process and in every activity. And I came up with this inside-out diagram, which I've revised a few times over the years. And the idea is to cease to see testing or even SQA as a step or a phase or whatever in your software development lifecycle, but rather an all-encompassing framework that the whole lifecycle lives in. So I've shown you this diagram before. We're going to talk about it in a bit more detail. The whole idea, yes, I can actually remember to use the laser pointer. Oh, look at that. Basic idea here is what you're doing is you're taking either an existing deliverable or a template. You're doing your process activity, which can be analysis, design, architecture, coding, whatever. And the result is a new or modified deliverable, which is then evaluated, stored, so on and so forth. So this is sort of the whole development process in a nutshell, but everything surrounding here is part of quality assurance. And we're going to talk about how that works. First, you have the inputs. These are the things that are going to affect this process activity. You've got your methodology, and the input is not just, I'm doing agile versus waterfall or whatever. It's, I'm at this phase. I'm doing design, or I am writing unit tests, or I am collecting requirements. Methodology helps determine what you have. You may have some number of existing deliverables. If you're truly starting from scratch, you don't have any, though if you're wise, you'll have some useful templates that you either have made up yourselves or that you've stolen from elsewhere. Brief interlude here. Jerry Weinberg. If you see a book by Jerry Weinberg, feel free to buy it and read it. The man, he actually, his Psychology of Computer Programming predates Mythical Man Month by 4 years. He wrote it in '71. And it's still one of the best works ever written on software engineering. It can be hard to get through because all the technology is even older than Mythical Man Month. But his insights are there. He's got a great book on becoming a technical leader, which I highly recommend. And he has an interesting observation there. And Jerry being Jerry, it's somewhat tongue-in-cheek and also serious. He says, why do we have such a hard time coming up with new ideas? He says, well, as children, we're raised, among other things, to avoid three things: error, theft, and copulation. He says, those are the sources of ideas. You get ideas by making mistakes, you get ideas by stealing ideas from others, you get ideas by combining unassociated ideas into something new. That was actually our unofficial motto at Pages, was error, theft, and copulation. But the point is, and of course Steve Jobs is famous saying, good artists borrow, great artists steal. When you find something that works, grab it, assuming you can. I'm not advocating any kind of IP theft, quite the opposite. But, feel free to find working code. Feel free to find, this is a great template. In fact, as I've mentioned before, for next semester, I'm going to have standard templates for all the deliverables. And basically a grading sheet ahead of time saying this is how this, your filling in here will be graded. I'm going to give more direction than I've given the last 2 semesters on this because I think that's only fair. But you all got great grades, so don't worry about it. Anyway, so existing deliverables, guidelines and standards. Some of that's derived from methodology, some of it can be based on the language or other tools that you're using. Some of it may be internal. At Pages, we had our Objective-C coding standard. It wasn't always followed, and me being me, when I was working on other people's code, if it was formatted wrong, I would go through and reformat it to follow the company standard. I know 1 or 2 of the developers were a little irritated by that, but I didn't care. Because if you have more than 1 person working on a project, you want to reduce the barriers to someone else understanding your code. Expertise. This is an important part of SQA. Get someone who knows what they're doing in each particular area. The side-scrolling project, you had someone who was familiar with a particular engine. And it's kind of like, okay, that's an important part of SQA, whereas in the Runaway IT project memo article, no, it wasn't that one. It was my time at Motorola, where they're using ASN.1 language, a 1.0 release of the development environment, and no one had ever worked in it before. And yet they're doing an accelerated time frame. Key values, what is important to your organization or company? It may be important to do a quarterly release. It may be important to do best of breed and leapfrog everyone else. So these are all inputs that go into the process activity, and I think I just summarized all of that. Let's see if there's anything new here. Key values, business drivers, as I said, enterprise architecture, market forces, key performance indicators, service level agreements. SLA, for example. If you have a customer-facing website, this is something I got called in on at Cap One. They had their website for their consumer credit cards. So I log onto it because I have Cap One cards. Okay, this is supposed to be up. It's either 4 nines or 5 nines, meaning 99.999% of the time, which is like it can be down an hour and a half a month. Is what that's their SLA. I with some other people from OSG got called in because it went down for 12 hours on a Saturday. And they wanted to find out why and to make sure it never happened again. Again, expertise, subject matter, technical, methodology, language, existing deliverables, methodology. Okay, we covered all that. Okay, so your actual process activity, this is when you're doing what you're doing. This is the actual human work. I am now coding. I am now designing. I am now writing requirements. I am now designing the user interface. So the whole thing is that this process wraps around every single human activity that's there. And the result is a new or modified deliverable of some kind, or deliverables. It could be multiple ones. If I'm doing, if I'm writing use cases, I may end up with an actual structured use case. I may end up with several sample prototype screens. I may end up with a test script that says, here's how to test this use case, it's been implemented properly, and so on. I'm basically going through the slides, so I'll just skip to the next one. So, you have your inputs, you do your work, and then you have some way of assessing it. There are various ways, and I could probably add a few more boxes or bubbles in here. You have metrics, which we talked about. Metrics, in order to be useful, have to be objective, automated, repeatable, and actually useful, as opposed to sort of feeling, hey, we have this many lines of code. You know, what's the big deal? Reviews. The basic distinction here, reviews and testing, is reviews are human assessments. You're looking at the deliverable, whatever that is, and one or more people are looking at this and deciding, you know, this looks good, this has problems, I have more questions, something like that. Testing is, of course, the full scope of testing. We could do a whole lecture on type of test, but I didn't plan for that this year, so you guys are in luck. Or you're in luck, actually, probably. And then based on the metrics, the reviews, and the testing, you have a human evaluation, which is to say, and the evaluation here is, what do we now know that we didn't know before all of this? Well, we know that there are new bugs. We know that it's performing too slow. We know that there are some problems, that this part of the design isn't matching up with the architecture. We know that we need to go back to the customer because we've got some requirements that clearly are incomplete, and so on. So, and yeah. Oh, by the way, going back here, you'll notice key values also feeds into evaluation. In other words, evaluation is, as you'll read in Webster number 8, which is the white paper I did at Price Waterhouse, I quote Jerry Weinberg as saying, quality is value to some person. And the key values for your team, your organization, your company, are part of what color the evaluation. Okay, and now you have forms of feedback and control. And again, you'd be surprised at how many organizations do a poor job in these three areas. And these are critical areas. The first is configuration management. All deliverables should be in some sort of CM system. You should be able to go back and say, what did this code look like on October 31st at 11:50 a.m.? Because someone checked something in and broke something permanently. This is why you have things like Git. This is why you have source code control systems, ways to manage the deliverables. And you folks are all familiar with that, but trust me, there are a lot of organizations that do very primitive things here. As I told you, the SAP case I testified in New York in June on, this was a company that literally had developers in various parts of the world, and they had no source control system. They were using email to send around new versions of modules. I mean, I ran across that, and I just about put my face through the table. It's like, I can't believe that. You know, yes?
What exactly do you mean when you say like you testify? Like, what exactly do you do with these companies?
Oh, well, there's two things I do. I do consulting to go into companies that have trouble projects, and I look at them and say, here are the things that are going wrong, this is what you need to change. And they usually ignore me. Occasionally they pay attention, but usually they ignore me. It's like, I mean, I once did that 3 different times at the same company, a year apart each time. The reading that you did at Anatomy of a Runaway IT Project, that was my 3rd time at the company. And as I mentioned in that post, they still didn't make the changes they need to. The project which had been going on for I think 4 years by now, was canceled, and the senior vice president was fired.
And what's the second part?
Second part is I act as an expert witness in litigation that involves computer technology.
What does that mean?
You ever watch Law and Order and you see the pathologist or the psychiatrist up on the stand saying, I've looked at these elements of the case, you know, I've looked at these pieces of evidence, and this is my considered expert judgment. I do that, but I do that from the computing point of view. So for example, in the case in June, it was a failed SAP implementation, and I read through thousands of pages of emails, memos, other documents in chronological order, and then I took peer-reviewed standards. You know, I had a book published by one professor via MIT Press on software failure, and used Caper-Jones as well, had a methodology that said, okay, here are the broad areas, here are the specific things within those broad areas. Here's how they show up consistently. And here, as a direct consequence, as shown in the documentation, is why it was late. So that's what I do.
Then who's like accusing who's like clients?
It's usually a client and a customer. It's a two, sometimes three-party
Gotcha.
contract to implement or develop software that goes south.
Okay.
I mean, it's just bears a lot of parallels with, say, a failed construction project where the people, you know, trying to get the building built are suing the contractor or the architect or whatever because it either never got built or it was way late or whatever. So you've got that. You've got configuration management. You have defect feature management. Again, lots of tools, including great free tools in which you can simply file bug reports and or feature requests, which are really, when you think about it for about 5 seconds, they're the same thing on a continuum. A feature request says this is something I want in a program that isn't there. Now it may simply be missing functionality. In some cases, missing functionality is a showstopper. In some cases, it's a, well, we're saving that for 2.0. So you want to be tracking all your defects and all your feature requests. You want configuration and release management. And I won't talk about release management. This is your classic alpha, beta, golden master. The steps between when you think something is close to done and when it actually goes into production or goes out of the shelves. This one is really more human-oriented. And this says, okay, we've done stuff, we've done work, we did evaluate, we did these types of evaluations, looked over, and you're saying, how can we do things better? It's like, oh, this tool isn't working out, let's shift to another one. Or we need to shift our build sequence from every week to every other week until we get things more stable. So these are all forms of feedback, which I talked about. So that's, and look, here we are at just about 30 minutes. That's pretty much this in a nutshell. You know, if there's anything that, and I don't just say this because it's me, if there's anything that I really like you to sort of grab and take with you when you go out to the world to work, it's this slide presentation, because even if your company isn't doing this, you can use this as a guideline to improve your own work and to make yourself look good. Because all these, basically everything else here outside of the process creating a new or modified deliverable are things that you can seek out to use to improve your own performance in your own work. And you can raise the issues. You know, you can go and say, well, you know, do we have any coding standards? Do we have, you know, formatting standards? Do we use tabs or spaces?
Start a war right there.
I was going to say, one of the great wars. Anyway, but, you know, do we have, you know, you're in a project, if you stop and think some of these here, the midterm question that asked about, you know, your two fellow undergrads wanting to start up a business. There are a lot of stuff here that you could go through to say, okay, this is stuff I want to know before I say yay or nay. You know, actually, some of you did answer. Some of you said, well, what's our expertise? You know, what is it we're actually trying to accomplish? You know, is this all from scratch? How are we going to do this development? The reason why I encourage this is to encourage more comprehensive integrated view. And I think what this will actually do, this kind of approach, will help to surface problems faster. And we've talked about this any number of times, but this deferring the difficult is so pervasive, and it's pervasive because none of us like pain. You know, you get an assignment and your boss says, well, when can you have this done? And it's very hard to say, well, here are all the things that I don't know yet, and this is a really difficult problem, as opposed to saying, I can have this prototype by next week, and you look good. But eventually that hard stuff needs to be done. And this sort of framework helps to flesh out some of the hard stuff early, if used. Okay, pending assignments, 7 more billable hours this week. For anyone who hasn't read Webster 7, I actually pushed the deadline to next week, which is also deadline for Webster 8 just before class. Right now you should be done with all the podcasts, all the deliverables except the video, all the readings except 7 and 8, which we'll do next week. Like I said, contact me if either there are things that you tried to record, and I know Learning Suite is flaky at times. If there's stuff you just didn't do, and you'd like to get partial credit, I'm willing to negotiate partial credit on stuff. Some of you have missed classes. If you have watched the videos, or if you watched the videos, to make that up, let me know. If you need to know what classes you've missed, send me an email, and I will let you know. And be working on your projects, and particularly your project videos, which will be 2 weeks here in class. And let me take roll, and then we're done for the day. Nothing quite like getting out of class hour and a half early. Okay. Alan. Reg is here. Rachel, I saw you up there. Jasmine's not here. She's sitting somewhere else. Adam, here. Scott,
Here.
Here you are. Cole is here. Sean,
Here.
here. I think I've learned that you sit up there. Dagan is here. Actually, Reg is not here. Dagan's here. Trevor Lyon.
Here.
Catherine. Trevor Renshaw. Stephen Richards. Jesse. Neil, right there. Matthew is up there. Ty's over there. Jacob. Elise. Did I miss anyone?
Did you mention one?
I think I double marked, okay, and.
Josh Nelson.
Aha, yes. Okay, I got you. It's late in the semester. If you have any questions individually, you can come see me. Any questions that you think the whole class might be interested in before I'll get dismissed? If not, we've got a couple free hours.